Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Children and Families and Communities Transforming the Child Welfare System. We're just going to give people about 1 minute to come in, and we will start right away. Sit down, get your lunch out, and we look forward to having you with us this afternoon. All right, well, we hope everyone is settled into the webinar. As I said, this is Children and Families and Communities Transforming the Child Welfare System. I'm Jenny Pokempner from Juvenile Law Center. We thank you for joining us today for our final 45-minute conversation in commemoration of our 45th anniversary. We're glad you're here today for our last session. We invite you to take a look at our past conversations that we've had the past month and a half. They're posted on our YouTube site and on our website. We also invite you to check out our website at jlc.org to check on what we're doing, keep up to date, and also sign up for our communications if you're not getting them already. We also ask that you consider donating if you want to support our work. There should be a donate button on your screen right now. This is our last 45-minute series, and we will stick to the 45 minutes, but we did want to invite you at the end of this session. We will be playing a video of a speech that was given by MaryLee Allen when she won Juvenile Law Center's Leadership Prize in 2017. MaryLee was a leader who was part of and valued transformation, so we're excited to leave the session with her words and to honor her memory and her work. I want to now introduce our colleagues who are joining me today. Really excited to have them here with us. Jennifer Rodriguez is the Executive Director of Youth Law Center. Sixto Cancel is the Chief Executive Officer of Think of Us. They both have spent their entire careers working to ensure well-being, equity, family, and opportunity for all children in the child welfare and juvenile justice system. Their work is about transformation, and they do their work in partnership with youth and families, and I'm happy to have them with us here today. Our topic today is about transforming the child welfare system, and for I'm sure all of you on the call, as well as my colleagues doing the conversation with me today, we know that this desire for transformation is not new. The child welfare system doesn't do a good job of supporting families in their communities, doesn't do a good job of investing in families, and the system does continue to operate in racist ways that often are punitive rather than supportive. So today we wanted to talk about transformation. As I said, the desire to transform is not new, but we wanted to talk about today if this is a particular moment where there might be a hope for transformation, and if that's the case, what might it take to get us there? So I wanted to start, Jennifer and Sixto, asking you a question that would kind of help give our audience a little bit of background. I mentioned a couple of things, obviously, that we'd want to transform away from and change to, but I wanted to ask you both to just start out with giving us a little bit of an idea of what are the elements of our current system that are in the greatest need of transformation. And I'll start with you, Jennifer.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be with you. So I think first of all, I want to say that I think it's critical that we focus on what we are moving our reform to, because it's really easy with child welfare reform to think of how to stop all of the things that are bad for children and never think of the vision of what we want to collectively move towards. And when you do that, inevitably what you end up doing is replacing things that are horrible and harmful and really bad with things that are slightly less bad. You get the kind of incremental reform that is really not worthy or deserving of our children and youth. So I really appreciate the question around what would it look like if we were actually able to really give children and youth the childhoods that they deserve and the futures and the opportunities that they deserve. So I want to say a couple of things. I think right now what is getting a lot of media attention is the need to end child welfare altogether. And I think it's really important that if there's a single child who's removed and separated from their family, who we could have preserved and kept that relationship at any cost, no matter what the cost is to the system, then that's a travesty. And that should have all hands on deck. And we should do everything possible to not separate or support. But I also think that there are children who are in foster care right now already, who have already been removed. And there are likely, until we solve the really big issues, incarceration, structural racism, an economic support set, a safety net that supports everyone, immigration, you name it, what foster care ends up dealing with is all of the intractable issues in our society that we haven't been able to fix. So until we can fix those things, we have an obligation, I believe, like a huge responsibility to ensure that if the government intervenes in the life of a family and a child, and if they remove a child, there is no reason that foster care has to be a horrible experience. We can commit to saying if a child leaves home, we're going to ensure that that experience is actually a positive intervention. And really, there are several elements that I think are involved with that. But the most basic element that we should be working towards reform on is the same element that is true for any of you on here who have children or who love children in your life, which is that we have an obligation to ensure that every child in foster care is in a setting where they are loved, cared for, nurtured, supported, where they feel safe, where they do not feel fear of being hurt or harmed, where they do not feel loss and loneliness, that they are sort of existing and nobody cares whether they live or die. Those are things we have control over right now in our system. So to me, the most important element, one, is that we are thinking of every single action that we take in child welfare as either moving us towards a child being connected, loved, and parented. And I think that's bigger. I know there are folks who are child welfare experts who are on this call. I just want to say that I think that's bigger than the way that the field talks about permanency in relationships, because I don't care, even if a child is only in foster care for 2 days and then returns back home to their natural family. We have an obligation for those 2 days to make sure that they are parented, loved, and supported in that temporary placement. And 2 days sounds so short to all of us adults, but I think everyone probably, if they push themselves, can remember what it felt like to be a child. And like, particularly it's the holidays, you can remember what it felt like to be waiting for Christmas, and 2 days felt like eternity. And that's the way it feels for our children too. If they are in a setting where they feel completely alone and abandoned and scared for 2 days, that's an entire lifetime, and it doesn't have to be that way. So to me, the reform that we're looking at, people get uncomfortable when I talk about love in child welfare, but I think anytime we have a conversation about foster care and children who are in care and we can't talk about love, to me, we're talking about something dysfunctional. So our reform should be really based on the principles of love, of ensuring that children feel that, even if they're feeling that briefly or temporarily. And certainly for our children and youth who are in the system for a longer time, every single thing we do either moves them towards being connected and loved and cared for and supported, or it gets us away from it. You can look at every single element of the system. So to me, that's where our reform should be going.
Thanks so much. And thanks for reframing the question, because I think you're right. When we talk about just what we want to get away from, it does kind of make us lose focus if we're not really focused on kind of where we want to head towards. And with that, Sixto, from your perspective, what does the transformation that you are headed towards in your work, what does that vision look like?
I think Jennifer named it, and it is the opportunity for every child to feel love and to believe that they're lovable, because the current experience of the system tells us otherwise. How is it that you hear someone say, hey, you're in my home, you're going to be part of our family, I love you, and then if you just don't fit in, or you've done something that disturbs the peace too much, now you find yourself literally going to a new place, literally packing your stuff in trash bags. So this idea of what does it mean to not have a voice in that courtroom? What does it mean not to have a voice in moving, not have a voice in your visitation? All of that is reinforcing this idea that you are unlovable. And it takes quite a bit of time to get to that other side. But I would say is that what's needed in this new system is really to understand what have we inherited from these mental models, right? And I've been digging deep to say, where did we literally build this child welfare system from? And it comes from when this country was colonized. When we look at what was the foundation of how we treated children and poor people in England when the Protestant Revolution happened, you literally had Queen Elizabeth for the first time when the church got separated from when they departed from the Catholic Church, let's say, for the first time, government had to respond to poor people. That used to be the Catholic Church responsibility. And the first time in 1533, when they did this, what they put on the books was a law that said, here are the worthy poor, the worthy needy, and here are the unworthy needy. And the transaction was, those who are worthy, you will get direct relief. Those who are not, you won't. And those who are worthy, we will auction you off in terms of indentured servitude, and you can work and get the relief that you need. That's how our colonies started until all the way up to the orphan training movement. And then the orphan training movement was another transaction. I will take you from the city, place you on farms in the middle of the country. You now have a place to sleep and eat, but you're going to work. And our system is literally still based on that transactional fundamental principle that has been here way before even the country was here, which is you have to earn the support you get. We look down at whether you're worthy or needy, and in foster care, it has always been an exchange. We have always had a system that was based on the transactional, what is this child going to benefit you? Working the farm, working your house, or giving you a paycheck today?
So we need to move away from that.
We have to accept that when the words abolish a system come up to place, we'll get the questions of, well, where are you going to put the children who need safety, et cetera. We have to, figure out where is this idea of extreme safety is coming from, because there is a portion of our young people that need to be safe. But the majority of cases that we have to do with neglect, have to do with people who were too poor to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And so what I envision is a system where we're actually designing from the ground up, where we're saying, what are the activities that actually promote that bond between people and in relationship, that actually aims to increase that neurodevelopment of that child, that adolescent, that young adult? How is it that we're actually helping that network of people actually heal? Because this is just a representation of how communities are being broken down.
And for both of you, your work has from the start, you've partnered with young people and families that are impacted by the system. And that has been kind of the way that you both do your work, but also it's a strategy. Why is it important, and is it even more important now as part of that transformation strategy? Sixto, do you want to start with that question?
Sure. For us, it's like we don't partner with young people. We center our work in the lived experience. It is about integration. We have talked about engagement too long. We have talked about how we show up, with how young people should have a voice. No. To do this work without young people and people who have lived experience, that means alumni also, it is a part of the formula of doing it right. And that's your first beat to know that you're off track. If you don't even center that piece there.
Okay, and Jennifer, what about you?
Yeah, I 1,000% agree with Sixto. I think that reform that isn't truly centered on young people and on their leadership is probably going to be reform that doesn't work. Over Thanksgiving break, I had the chance to read Alicia Garza's new book. And she has a really fantastic analysis in there of the difference between empowerment and power. And, as somebody who came into this work as a youth advocate, and where my first experiences were telling my story, talking to folks about what it felt like to grow up in group homes and shelters and be incarcerated as a teenager and be in psychiatric hospitals, I remember that the feeling that I had, which I thought was power, and folks around me I think described it as power in child welfare. We're giving you the chance to tell your story. People are listening to you. You're in a space where other people have had similar experiences. But her analysis is that that's empowerment. When we give people the chance to feel good about themselves, to feel like they're not alone in that situation, then it's empowerment, which is important, but it is discrete and entirely different from power. Power is the feeling and the ability to be able to make changes in your own life and in the lives of other folks. And that's where our field is not quite at yet. They are, I think, accepting of the idea that and working hard on creating empowerment opportunities, but they have not yet moved to trying to identify what are all the ways that, one, the system takes power away from young people, interferes with their ability to be able to make changes in their own life and be a decision maker at all of the various decision-making points, and also make changes in other folks' life. Like, I can speak for myself and say the reason I'm a lawyer now and that I'm able to have the kind of life that I probably could have never dreamed of having as a child is because I had those experiences to be able to make significant changes in the lives of others. It made me feel like there was meaning to my life. It made me feel like I was powerful as an individual. And that can't take that away from young people. So I think we're now at a moment, to me, and I'm thrilled that Sixto is on here because I think technology is a really important tool. Folks need to believe that power is an important goal, that is our work. Our work should be building the power of every single young person who is system involved. And I don't care whether you are a social worker or a visitation supervisor or a children's attorney or a judge or an advocate, you have to see your role and your actions as either, again, moving towards building a young person's power or taking away in some way their ability to be able to change their own life and the lives of other people. So you have to believe that that is an important goal. But then I think folks who work in the system get stuck and aren't sure, how do you really do that? And the way we've typically done that in our foster care advocacy and reform work is to bring a small group of people who have had particular experience to sort of represent the whole. But the truth of the matter is that technology allows us to actually do better than that, right? So the technology that we're all talking with you on the call today, we can find out from every single one of you who's on this Zoom in real time, whether you disagree with us, whether you agree with us, whether you have questions about what we're saying, whether you want us to talk about something else entirely differently. That's a real tool and gift that technology gives to us. We have that same capacity in our work in the system to be hearing from young people, children, and the families who care for them in real time. During the course, and I know Sixto has mechanisms that he's doing this in the Think of Us work. We also started doing this in our work in our quality parenting initiative over the course of the pandemic, because when the pandemic hit, one of the things that systems across the country started to deal with is what are the most pressing and urgent needs of youth and families during this crisis who are system involved? And the answers were wildly different. So some people thought nobody had technology, right? That nobody was going to be able to be at school. Nobody was going to be able to access telehealth. Nobody was going to be able to visit with their social worker. Other people thought everyone has technology. Everyone at least has a smartphone that they can get online they'll be able to access things. We should not be that clueless about what children and youth and families need. And so we started to work with somebody who had some technology that they were deploying in the health system to measure capacity of hospitals to provide PPE equipment and how many ICU beds, to just say, could you take this ability to text folks and ask them what their needs are, how they're doing, and adapt it for child welfare? It was literally adapted within a week because that's the speed at which technology moves. And in a number of our QPI jurisdictions across the country, they were able to just ask every single child and family. They focused on families, on our foster families that were in the system, and texted them and said, tell us what your most pressing need is right now. Tell us on a scale of 1 to 5, how stressed are you right now? And that allowed systems, one, to individually respond to the needs of every specific family. So if one family said, our biggest need is food insecurity, we're food insecure in this home, then that agency could go back to that family and make sure that they got food today. And if another family said, our biggest need is that children in our home really need tutoring, they're falling behind educationally, they could deploy a tutor out that same day. But they also had then aggregate data for their system to make better decisions about where to deploy resources, how to make decisions. I think that's the future, right? If you have that value of the experience of every single child in our system matters, and it should be driving decision making. And in fact, like, we're the tools and the mechanisms for getting the work done, but they are the ones who know what they need, and they can be identifying those needs and responding to them. Then that's an entirely different approach to child welfare, and it's a different approach to to youth and family engagement, right? Because it's one that says, we actually aren't doing a great job with youth and family engagement unless we have identified a way for every voice in our system to be heard. Whether you are the 2% that has a vastly unique experience that's different from everyone else's experience, your experience matters. And we have an obligation as a system to consider what your needs are and develop an approach and a response that's unique to you. And so I'm excited about, I think we have some more work to do to get people on the values piece of sort of empowerment and building power are different things. And they actually require different strategies than the one that we're used to doing. It's not just, sort of inviting a few young people to a meeting and asking them to share theirs. It's a different way of actually doing business. And actually, you can't do your business well, no matter who you are in the system, unless you adopt that strategy.
No, and that's a great point. And we're getting some comments in the chat, and we invite you to either chat in some questions or comments, but just mentioning kind of the struggle that some of us have even with colleagues, either who might be guardian ad litems, who might not yet feel that sharing power is something that is appropriate to do for a young person. So what are ways that we can really, because it's something I think most of us on the call believe is important to do as a matter of respect, but also that it's effective in terms of getting a good result for the young person, both in terms of, again, treating them with respect, but engaging them more in services perhaps, or just being able to develop connections. How do you explain the importance, Jennifer and Sixto, of kind of sharing power with young people? Why is it something that we all should be kind of demanding of ourselves and our colleagues? Sixto, do you want to start?
Absolutely. So when I think about this, I have to just note, like, we had the power by default. It was an oppressive structural entity that went ahead and it has created a condition where we have to continuously fight to hold our power. And so what I mean by that is when I wanted to go to a 4-year university, I was being told by the system, go to a 2-year university. We don't want you to fail out. You don't want to have debt, right? When I wanted to see my siblings, it was, oh, you have some healing to do. Oh, they're in a group home. They have to wait till they're out. It is power that has been stripped from us. It's unjust control over our lives, which that is the definition of oppression. And so then we do have that response where you see people, how do you respond to oppression? According to Dr. King's work, right? You have the violent response, and we see the young people like me who fought back like hell. Then you have the given to the oppressor. Sometimes you just don't have the energy and you get depressed. And then you have the nonviolent response. Let me try to be the perfect foster child. Let me try to fit into this family's new rules, new cultures, and so forth. So for me, when I think of this, I get such a, there's something that I start to experience because it is by default that you took something away from a group of people, and then you are all making it seem like it is the best strategy to do. And it's not a trend. It is just, we've inherently have adopted the racist, colonized principles and then have normalized them to the point where we think it's okay for one person to literally dictate what's happening over another person's life, frame it before the courts, literally legally bind it, and then move forward.
Okay, great, thanks, Sixto. And Sixto, Jennifer talked about how they've been using technology as part of the QPI projects across the country, and you obviously have been doing that from the start. But can you talk to us about some of maybe what you've learned during the last several months as you've been really working hard day and night to connect with young people to find out what they need?
Yeah, I would say when COVID started, one of the first things we did was we called for a town hall, and we knew that it was going to be important for a figure to be keeping young people like literally center, right? And the thing about town halls is that they can be so political. And we were thinking through, how do we not make this about the politics or even about an opinion, but directly about what young people and what everyone was saying, because we knew that it was going to affect everyone. So I'm going to show you a quick screen. I'm going to share my screen real quick and share with you the most important piece of our town hall was not even the town hall itself, but it was in the webinar. We literally asked people, what is some of the biggest needs? And we had them categorized, and we went nitty gritty, right? Can y'all see my screen? Which
Yep.
screen is it? The spreadsheet?
We can only see the mountain and the seas right now.
It's a default. I haven't been there. But what we asked folks, what we did was we asked folks to ask them what did they need. And we asked, right? Like we asked all types of folks who registered for this webinar. And then from this came over 3,000 responses across the country. And we can tell where they were from, right? And from leaders, from nonprofit leaders, and you named it. And from that is where we were able to get our list and show, hey, here are the top 10 needs. And the top need came back as food. It is March 13 was a national emergency. March 19th, we're having the pandemic. March 15, me and my team are confused because food is the top issue, and it's not an issue. This is before everybody started mobilizing. And yet we were like, we have to put out this data because this is the facts. It's been reported from the ground, right? If we would have chose, we probably would have said housing or we would have said blank. But centering our report outs, our data, and what we do in the lived experience, that is what you get. Because of that, the thing that I'm most proud of is that young people who were struggling themselves started putting care packages of food for other young people. And that is what we need more of, is for folks to be able to be lifted up that way. We literally spent that first couple of months doing one thing, which was hearing the problems, scouting out for who was solving them, and then lifting that work up, and then literally grabbing copy and paste language of emails, of policies, of memos, and giving it to other jurisdictions, giving it to other youth boards and young people so that then they can mobilize. And sometimes I think we're living in this place where we think we have to have a very fancy use of technology. And here, all we had to do was have a website, ask people for stuff, have people register, give us insight, and then do right by them and be able to push that back out.
Right. And one of the things that you've kind of shared with us throughout the pandemic and mentioned earlier is, just giving youth directly what they need. And we see that when you talked earlier about the beginning of evolution of our child welfare system and having a system where you have hoops that you have to jump through to get assistance. And you've kind of been showing us that there's a great value in just giving youth and also families exactly what they need without any barriers. And when you look at how that's worked, or just your insights from the last couple months, is that part of where you see transformation going, not just for young people, but for families connected with the system, figuring out ways just to get resources to people without hoops and barriers?
I go back to this notion of having to earn support. One of the things that we were trying to push forward and we're trying to do is think through, like, how do we actually get all of these people's needs met? And we were finding that outside of tech, outside of in the tech nonprofit world, not child welfare, there were people like MaryLee who are helping 425,000 families by just streamlining the food stamp process in 44 states with a 10-question application on their phones. So we're like seeing all these innovations and saying, wait, where are our young people? And we couldn't go to these folks with numbers. And that was one problem because everyone's scared to kind of share some of those numbers. And the second thing that we saw was that people were making young people do all the things in the world to do it. And we don't need another adult, another program. Sometimes you just need to cut a check. So we went ahead, got a little bit of tiny unrestricted money, $50,000, and said, let's go ahead and put out a cash grant. And we put out that application. And Lord, I call this like foster care viral because it wasn't viral to be viral enough in like the general public, but viral for our world. We had 27,000 people apply. And so at that moment, we were like, holy crap, that's a lot of folks. So let's go start trying to find folks who are already given out money and apply it to our list. And that totally, in a total, we are almost at 600,000 now of money that's going to be able to go out the door to young people in need. And part of that was asking young people directly, and no strings attached, right? And part of that was asking young people directly, like, what is their housing situation? What is their food situation? And so that we could know, like, look, there are programs right now that exist that are tech nonprofits who once a month, they are giving young people, but they're giving other folks, a quick kind of stipend cash for meals and things of that nature that our youth qualify for, but it doesn't say foster youth on it. And so we don't put it into that bucket. And so we starting to get this preliminary data around what are some of these needs so that then we can mobilize others outside of child welfare to start directly being able to impact some of those needs. And I'll note, it has been such a learning lesson on this journey, right? Because the solution here is not going to be think of us to become like the federal government and be able to support directly all these young people. It's going to be what now we can do with that data. For example, taking the housing data and saying, hey, we have 11,000 young people across the country who said they want a housing voucher, and you're limited 50 per housing public housing jurisdiction. Now we can have the argument to reallocate that, right? But the most important piece of this, and what we asked young people when they did this application, was would they be willing to literally share the data with people who can do something about it if they take action. And so now preparing this data so that think of us as not holding the power and at the center of being able to do all the analysis, and then you have to read a report, but can you go ahead and touch the data and say, you know what, I want to know what happened in this zip code, this neighborhood, this county, this city, and I'm willing to do blank. And that means if a youth board wants to look at this and say, we're going to mobilize around these workshops around budgets, because that was the number one money ask. The number one ask of 27,000 applicants was help me create a budget during this time, right? So there are people who can do that. Or if it's more complicated, like figuring out how do we redistribute $153 million at the federal level that's set aside for these housing vouchers.
Great, thanks. And I want to shift back, Jennifer, to you you both are kind of giving good examples of how you both, speak directly to young people, empower them, but also start to shift the power. And Jennifer, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, because I think it's helpful to give people kind of these concrete examples of how we do that, because I think it is hard for some of us. Do you see the Quality Parenting Initiative as part of that strategy, kind of enlisting families as both experts? Does that type of initiative show us how to both empower families but also shift power?
So it's interesting. I was thinking while Sixto is talking that like the best ideas in child welfare, like what Sixto did, are actually the simplest ones. They're like the most respectful and simplest ones, because the premise of what Sixto is doing is asking people individually, what do you need? And then actually listening and responding, which is like not a revolutionary idea, right? Like that's, and in terms of crisis response, it's sort of what everyone knows is the number one thing, and it's what nobody does in foster care. Nobody does it. So it's really the basic principle that each of us have the ability to build that power and to actually have our efforts be responsive if we are starting with seeking out everyone we can to ask them, what do you need? And that is really where the Quality Parenting Initiative started. It started from, you had asked the question earlier about what do you do about folks who don't believe that building power for youth and having them really drive decision making is the right approach. I mean, you can start from sort of a moral place. You can start from a place of listening to young people who have been successful, talk about how they got there. Inevitably, you're going to hear it was through somebody investing in building their power. Or you could start from adolescent development, right? Like all of the research is crystal clear that in order to have healthy development as a teenager and thrive as an adult, you have to actually have opportunities to drive decision making. And so in our work on foster care reform, we launched the Quality Parenting Initiative about 13 years ago now, and we started with the science, which is crystal clear that the only thing that we know that's actually effective and that can work is relationships, love, parenting. And so then we went, because we don't know how to provide that, we didn't know what the barriers were. So we went to all the people that were directly impacted. We were just reminiscing over this the other day. We didn't even know how to define excellent parenting when we started the Quality Parenting Initiative in Florida. So we asked youth to nominate. Tell us, nominate a foster parent that you had at some point that you think was an excellent foster parent. We're going to invite those people to come talk to us, to be in a room with us, and to tell us what you need to make that happen. How were you able to provide excellent parenting? What got in the way of that happening? And so in that first year, we really had the whole platform from young people who were in care or who had been in care, from foster parents who were providing the excellent foster parenting, from the line workers who were working closest to those folks and could see, here's the barrier. Here's the barrier. For example, one of the very first issues that we heard from foster parents was, one of the things that I did was I snuck around the system to work with this young person's biological family. Because the youth told me that was really important to me to maintain relationship with my auntie or my siblings or my mom or my dad. And so the system told me I couldn't do that. That was a conflict, but I did it anyway. So that was sort of an issue day one in QPI, was that. And then when we talked to birth parents who had been involved in the system, that led us to the birth parents. And when we talked to them, they said, the reason I reunified was because I had a foster parent who was my cheerleader, who never gave up on me when other folks gave up on me, who made sure I got services. And so then we asked both of them, so what facilitated that? What could we do differently? And we asked the workers, what are you doing to make this happen? And we could here are the system issues that are getting in the way. And they also had very concrete ideas that were very, very easy for how to change the system. So a youth and a birth parent came up with the very simple idea. Why doesn't somebody, when they drop the child off at the new placement at the foster parent's home, just call the birth parent and have the two of them have a conversation in the living room, allow the birth parent to share, here are the things, here's my child's favorite foods, here are the things that they're scared of, make sure that, you don't expose them to a dog, that you turn the light on when they sleep at night. Here are the things that are going to help the next 48 hours be less traumatic for this child. No cost to this, super simple, very low risk. So that was adopted by a number of our QPI sites across the country. They've now been working on this for several years. We now have legislation that was passed as a result of that in both Florida and Minnesota, institutionalizing this process called comfort calls. We never would have been able, I would not have been able to come up with that on my own. QPI as a system change initiative that's working in 80 jurisdictions in 10 states across the country wouldn't have been able to think that up. It was youth and families, the people who were there on the ground, who were able to come up with that idea that is really, it's a small change, but it makes life radically different for those children who have to come into care. And like we talked about earlier, who are feeling like their whole world has been turned upside down. It's a small thing that we can do to help them actually cope and to mitigate the trauma.
That's a great example. Thanks for that. And then for both of you, you know, Jennifer, you started by kind of in the beginning talking about kind of we need to balance our efforts to both kind of undo or upend the system as it is, but also be mindful that there's young people who might be in that system that we want to provide, like you said, love, excellent care for. How do we balance those two efforts that we should kind of we want to support both of those. How can we do that? I know that's a hard question.
It's not a hard question to me, actually. I mean, I think you have a responsibility. I am now lucky enough to be a mommy. I have 2 children. So when my son is an athlete. He plays travel basketball, or he played travel basketball. My daughter is a theater kid, right? She's involved in musical theater. Every single weekend, I would make choices about how to make sure both of their needs are met. My daughter hates sports. My son hates musical theater. Everyone had to we had to figure out something that worked for everyone. I did not choose one and abandon the other. So I think it's possible. I think it's possible to think of more than one thing at once, right? I think it's not often usual that our system is able to think of more than one thing at once, but I think it is absolutely critical that we say, you have a responsibility to children who are already in the system, to those thousands of Black and brown children who are sitting in institutional care, who are sitting in congregate care, who are not loved, not being parented, not connected, who are being abused and harmed. We have an absolute obligation, because we have already intervened in their life, to get them out of those facilities and to get them into a family setting where they're going to be loved and cared for. We also have the responsibility at the same time to disrupt any practices and put in place new policies that can ensure that no family is separated unjustly, ever. So to me, there is no conflict between the 2 goals. It is overall a commitment to ensuring that every single child and family gets what they need. I mean, if we have that absolute sort of commitment to relationships and connection and parenting, you can extend it over any touch we have in the whole system. And we don't need to balance anything. We can have a commitment to all of our children.
And then put the resources behind both of those commitments.
That's right.
And Sixto, as we're getting closer to our 45-minute time ending, I want to start by asking you, for the audience we have here today, what are the 1 or 2 things you would ask them to do to kind of support the kind of work that you and Jennifer are doing to both, you know, transform the system for young people who need it, but also change those practices that are really harming families so they can have support in the community? What are the 1 or 2 things you want us to do? Sixto, I'll start with you.
Sorry, I was talking and
oh no,
I was on mute. I said the first thing that comes to mind is literally like, how do you center the work and how do you center your work and lived experience? How is it that you as a person doing work today is going out of your way to be able to listen, to be able to respond to that, to be able to incorporate those insights, incorporate enough feedback into your overall process? I think there's been some very tough moments, you know, in our whole COVID response, right? Because decisions have to be called, and you have to make some really tough decisions, and then there's ripple effects of those and unintended consequences and so forth. But I have felt very confident and good about most of those decisions, because they've been rooted in what we've heard. So even when we haven't understood it all, instead of rejecting that notion, I think that is your opportunity to be brave, to be courageous, and to push. And it's like Jennifer and I and our organizations can do that day in and day out, but we need the collective mass to get there with us.
Great, thanks so much, Sixto. Jennifer, what about you? What are 1 or 2 things you'd ask our audience to do to support the work you and Sixto and all of us are trying to do?
So I know our audience is really diverse and broad, and everyone is working in different facets of foster care. And so what I would say is going back to look at your own work and identifying If everyone could go back and identify 3 actions that you can take, 1, to build the power of the young people that you encounter. And so whether that is as small as asking, what do you need? Whether it's as big as getting them connected with advocacy work, that's going to allow them to sort of learn how to unlock the power and unleash the power they already have. I think everyone probably has some capacity for doing that. And then I would also look at whatever your realm is and identify what are the 3 things that you can do to also ensure that every youth that you encounter is loved and connected, and that, you know, it can, like, this journey of doing this, everyone matters. Every single person matters, whether you are the responsible for removal or advocating in court, or you're a CASA like Angelina who's volunteering to do the advocacy. Everyone has a role in ensuring that young people are loved and connected and feel, I love what Sixto said at the very beginning, that they feel they are lovable. That is our number one goal, is to make sure that our youth are exiting feeling infinitely lovable and worthy, because that's what they are.
Great, thanks so much. And for people on the call today, definitely we have Juvenile Law Center, Youth Law Center, and Think of Us have a lot of tools and resources to help you. So if you are anyone who's struggling with this or feeling like you're not supported in doing some of these things, we're happy to help you try to do that. So please reach out if you've been inspired or now have some tips and you want to put them into practice. So we really do want to support people on the call with this transformation. And thank you so much, Jennifer and Sixto. Always love to talk with you both. Think that it was great to hear both your vision for the future and also the work you guys continue to do. So definitely appreciate that. And then I think what we're going to do now is, as I mentioned at the beginning, is play a video. And I think all of you on the call know MaryLee Allen, who passed away a little over a year ago. MaryLee was the longtime policy director of at Children's Defense Fund, and she was a leader, friend, and mentor to thousands of people, and probably many of you who are on the call, you probably count her also as a leader, friend, and mentor. She really did play a role in every significant child welfare and children's policy reform in the last 30 to 40 years. She was a trailblazer with a creative mind and definitely a very kind heart. Her life work was really to build a world where families had their needs met in their communities, where children and family could thrive and were treated equitably. We wanted to play her speech to honor her work and her friendship to all of us, but we do hope that her words, along with the words of Jennifer and Sixto's, will inspire you to take part in the transformation that we talked about today, and we hope you heard about in the whole series that we did for our 45th anniversary. So I think, Rosie, I'm gonna ask you if you will do the honors to play. And thanks everyone for joining us today.
Tonight, we are honoring a leader who is revered by her colleagues and is still creating a vibrant, robust, and active legacy. I was in that small band of CDF colleagues, leading the Children Out of School report. So as one of my dearest colleagues and friends for more than 4 decades, it touches me both professionally and personally to present MaryLee Allen with the Juvenile Law Center's Leadership Prize for her extraordinary contribution to the field of child welfare.
Thank you, Anne, and special thanks to the Juvenile Law Center for their 40 years of advocacy and their continuing efforts. I've had the honor and the opportunity these last several years to work very closely with some of the JLC staff on looking at the educational needs of children in foster care. And it's a dynamic crew, I will tell you. So thank you. I'm really honored to follow up on this. Special thanks, too, to Marian Wright Edelman, to staff of the Children's Defense Fund, the Children's Defense Fund family, as we call it, because we have former CDFers scattered all over these days, and we consider them to be all part of the family. My own family who's here, let me also thank all the colleagues that are here representing different organizations that I've had the honor to work with for so long as we move ahead. Many young people, too, across the country who themselves have been part of the child welfare system. Those who are foster care alums or birth parents and others who I've gotten to know and work with and who have taught me so much. It really takes a village, and sometimes that's a term that gets overused, but I think when we talk about the change in child welfare, a village is really what it does take, because you have people from all sectors, people from the courts, people from the Congress, people, line workers and others who need to get together to make things work for children. And I've spent most of my advocacy years at CDF, as you've heard, but let me tell a little story. I was at CDF in this first life with Ann, and I went on to graduate school and was waiting to hear about a job. And Marian gave me a call and said, "Oh, can't you just help us out for 30 days while we're finishing up this project?" So the warning there is, if Marian Wright Edelman calls, be careful. So 30-some years later, I'm still there. But when I've spent most of my advocacy at CDF, because CDF's Leave No Child Behind mission to ensure every child a healthy start, a head start, a fair start, a safe start, and a moral start in life and successful passage to adulthood with the help of caring families and communities is what every child needs. And that's what I think if every child had the end of child poverty, if every child maintained gains in child health and nutrition that have been made, if we could assure families good affordable housing, if we could give every child a quality early childhood opportunity and have a true level education playing field, our child welfare and juvenile justice responsibilities would be much reduced. And as we look at working to give every child a safe, loving family, giving them a safe, loving family and community is the way to begin. And that was our goal with the publication of Children Without Homes that Ann mentioned. And I think Jane Nitzer was also a board member of Juvenile Law Center way back as well. So the world is small, or you might say the village is big, as we look at it. I think what's important, though, is to think about all the progress we've made since Children Without Homes. We didn't talk in Children Without Homes about the tens of thousands of older youth who age out of foster care at 18 and have no permanent families. We gave scant attention back then to the role of relatives in caring for children. We did not understand the trauma that burdens both parents and children in the child welfare system. And sometimes we send them back home, we send them out without dealing with that trauma. We're making progress now in pushing forward, as I said, educational stability and success for children in foster care. We underestimated, too, sadly, the financial motives that cause some group care providers to put children second, if that. But we also see positive state efforts to move children out of group care settings and into less restrictive, more family-like settings. And group care providers, we also see who've dramatically diversified their services around the country. We continue to push to keep children safely with their families, but must do more to heal the whole family as we do that. Over the decades, I think the Congress has passed about 20 different pieces of legislation, substantive child welfare legislation, that address many of the challenges that I just mentioned. But always there's much more to do, and to build on the progressive efforts underway in states and communities around the country. A child is abused and neglected in our country every 47 seconds. Nearly half of those children are under the age of 6. More than 650,000 children go in and out of foster care in the course of a year. And more than 20,000 older youth age out without permanent families to go to. So what must we do to move forward? I think there are 5 things, and I just want to tick through them very quickly. First, all of us inside and outside of the child welfare system must view children and families who come to the door of the system as our own children. And there was a situation a number of years ago when we were working on the Foster Care Independence Act in the late 1990s. Someone like myself can say that was just a few years ago, but it was very significant and it stuck with me all these years. We had the opportunity for a small group of foster care alums to meet with a small group of senators, members of the Senate Finance Committee. They were all by themselves. The reports that came out were very positive. But as it was winding down, one of the senators asked one of the young women what was more important to her, the bill's extended health care or the education improvements in the bill. And I understand that she said very respectfully, "Senator, would you ask your own child that question?" And I think as we move forward in child welfare reform, we've got to keep that front and center as we move forward. Second, we must get parents the substance abuse and mental health treatment that they need, because those are the problems that bring a large number of children and a large number of families to the door of the child welfare system. And with that, I've got to say that you all know that a bill that will be voted on most likely this Thursday in the House of Representatives would undo the critical Medicaid program that's the major supplier of that good mental health and substance abuse treatment. So please, we've got to stop that bill from ever becoming law as it moves forward and ends Medicaid as we know it. Third, we have to keep children safely with their families and recognize that means healing the whole family. We need a workforce that understands what that means and is trained to do that, and a broader community that can support the family once it's back together again. And if children need to be separated from their families, we must look first to kin as we move ahead. Fourth, we must keep front and center, and Gladys alluded to this, the racial disproportionality that pervades this child welfare system and so many of our child-serving systems. In 2020, not long from now, children of color will be the majority of children in our country. And therefore, we have to ensure that, in fact, we do give each of them a healthy start, a head start, a fair start, and I won't go on. Some of you may be asking, how can I be optimistic at a time like this, when the chaos and harms facing us daily are worse than any we've ever seen before? And I think, again, there are 4 points, shorter than the first 5, so don't worry, Sue. First, we can't let the trauma children have faced go untreated and drive children of all ages further into what the Children's Defense Fund calls the cradle-to-prison pipeline. But that's what we're doing if we don't, in fact, address their needs now. Second, I'm excited because alumni of foster care are out there meeting with their members of Congress, meeting with people in their community, and really making a difference. And they have the energy and they have the determination that's so critically important. And third, what's particularly important, and what I think I'm particularly proud of, are the young people who may have started their careers in child welfare and have hung there. And are really to do the leadership and to take on the responsibility to identify what's working and to make it work for many more children and families. It's really a critically important time. And fourth, and not insignificant, is the fact that child welfare has always had bipartisan support in the Congress. Perhaps that's never been more important than it is right now. That doesn't mean we don't play defense, because we've got to play defense and stop the critical harms to children that are underway with these health changes. But we've also got to turn again to offense. We came close last year, but we've got to turn to offense and forge ahead to better align federal child welfare funding with better outcomes for children. We must continue to put all of the pieces in place because we believe at the Children's Defense Fund that children don't come in pieces. Again, I just want to give my very special thanks to the Juvenile Law Center for this leadership prize, and I look forward to continuing to work with all of you to ensure every child the prize of a loving, safe, permanent family. Thank you.